and the worms. Jerry, my dad, was always trying to figure out a way to make money. I guess I've got that too. Do my sons. But we like being entrepreneurs with our own talents. But anyway, Jerry decided one time that he met a friend. I think he had a friend on the railroad there where he worked, because he worked for Jerry worked for the SB Railroad, Southern Pacific Railroad, all of his life. He was kind of embarrassed of it because he was a carpet salesman. He was kind of dressed nice and neat and clean. And then when he was a railroader, he was dressed more like me in overalls. And boy, he stunk when he came home. Holy smokes. He smelled like cigars all the time. It was horrible. And when you'd walk into the railroad office to find out when he was going to go to work and where he was going to go to work, they had all this pornography on the back windows. On the back wall, just naked women hanging up all over the back wall. I can't believe it. It was just like in a public place. But anyway, Jerry decided that he got to be friends with this guy on the railroad. I can't remember for sure all the particulars, but he started collecting worms, night crawlers, to sell to fishermen when they went fishing up to Strawberry or the different lakes, Pineview Dam, etc., etc. So what he did out to the west side of our house, where Clayton's house is now, but actually more where the trees are at the house at 222 East 3050 North. Right to the east of that, there's 3 big trees, and there's the basketball court. But just down from that, he built 3 gigantic cinder block pits. They were probably about 4 feet wide by about 30 feet long. And I think there was 3 or 4 of those big gigantic. It was on like just in the dirt, like a platform. He just built all these pits for worms. And then he mixed up peat moss and vegetable oil and dirt, or whatever he did. He mixed it up, put it in all these beds, kind of like a flower bed, but he put worms in there. He'd pick all these worms up, and then he'd put all the worms. He'd go out at night when it rained, and he'd get buckets and buckets of worms, and he'd hire the kids to get buckets and buckets of worms. They'd bring them home, and he'd sprinkle them out over on the rainy nights. He'd sprinkle them out all over on the peat moss, and then the worms would grow in, and the ones that were damaged would stay on top, and he'd throw those away so they didn't rot. And then he'd keep them cool. He'd keep them cool in the summer with cold water, and that would keep the worms healthy. And then he would open them up and pick them up. He would have a little fork, like a small pitchfork, and he would dig, and that would expose the worms. And then he would put 12 or 24 in each little RC bait bag. These little white worm RC bait bags. I think I still have a few of those floating around. But anyway, and then he would roll them up, put a little ice in each one, and then he would transport them to different places where they would sell the worms for 50 cents a dozen or whatever. But anyway, so my dad would travel around in his Volkswagen or in his car, and he would deliver dozens of worms to different locations where fishermen would take them and use them. He also got redworms. He used to use redworms also, and these redworms were in a different soil. He would use rabbit manure. Rabbit manure, that was the mixture. Peat moss and rabbit manure and vegetable oil. I don't know why that combination. I guess it keeps the acid level down a little bit in it. But anyway, he used these shocking rods. It's these metal rods with wooden handles. And then he'd put a paper clip or something like to each one. And then run a wire, and he'd stick it down in the ground, and those worms would just boil out of the ground. So whether it was a rainy night or an early morning when a lawn had been really watered, my dad would go out and he'd have his friends, or Paul Dickamore and some other kids, they'd come and they'd pick worms off the grass. You'd had to use rubber gloves so you didn't get shocked. But anyway, he would get hundreds and thousands of worms and deliver them, and that's how he made some of his money. But of course, I think that probably didn't work out for him either. There's a lot of things he tried that didn't work out. He was a good salesman, a carpet salesman, carpet and draperies, but primarily carpet. And then he was good at the railroad and had a good paying job at the railroad. But he was always wishing that he had more money and was in a fancier position. But yeah, he was, some of the guys around the neighborhood and the railroad would call him Wormy. Anyway, he was a hardworking. He wasn't afraid to try anything in general.